Is a world passport right for you? With President of the World Service Authority, David Gallup, a specialist in human rights and world citizenship. This is Live the Impossible Show, here to rock your world with quantum leaps on how to change reality, lead with passion, and co-create your dream. Tora, Pam, and Oliver dive deep with legendary conscious and world-changing leaders. Dare to be different and unleash your genius at our Holy Land membership site, WHOLYLAND.me. Is a world passport right for you? David Gallup, a specialist in human rights, world citizenship, world law education, and president of the World Service Authority. David shares how the world passport came to be and the incredible vision of Garry Davis to have a world of peace, equality, and freedom of movement. How can we create a governing system which supports the people of the world? How do you use the world passport? How to become a world citizen? Who are you? And do you still need visas with a world passport? Welcome to Live the Impossible Show, everyone, and a big warm welcome to our special guest today, David Gallup from World Service Authority. Hi, how are you, David?
Good. How are you, Oliver and Pam?
It's great to have you with us and to have the opportunity to find out more about the world passport.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you so much.
It's so wonderful to have you with us. We're very delighted that you accepted our invitation and to talk about this amazing, several documents that you offer in the organization that you have. Do you want to? Well, we've already sort of released that there's a passport involved, and I do have that passport myself, and I've used it to at some borders, and we'll talk about that later. But do you want to give us, David, please, a brief introduction to how did this come around? What is it? It's the organization that you have, and just a short introduction for the listeners.
Yes. Well, back in 1948, there was a man named Garry Davis, and he had been a bomber pilot in World War II, but really his passion was acting. He was an actor on Broadway, actually. And his brother was killed in the war, and of course, as a bomber pilot, he dropped bombs on Brandenburg, and he said, "Why am I killing people when I want to be making them laugh? Why am I dropping bombs on my fellow humans, brothers, sisters, and it doesn't make sense?" So he was very disillusioned when he came back from the war. And he read a book actually called Anatomy of Peace by Emery. Well, it looks like Reeves, but it's pronounced Revish. Anyway, that book really gave him the impetus to say, maybe I need to remove myself from this system that caused me to kill my fellow human. So he went to Paris. He decided that he was going to give up his American citizenship or U.S. citizenship in favor of world citizenship. He tried, and at first the U.S. Embassy said no, but his whole story is told in this book it's a little ragged because I go through it so much, but My Country is the World, and this we have available on our website, My Country is the World. He tells his story not just about his initial attempt at renunciation or giving up his citizenship, but then actually giving up his citizenship and then being in France illegally with no documents. And then how he camped out on the steps of the Palais de Chaillot, which is the big U-shaped building across from the Eiffel Tower in Paris where the UN was, and how he stood in the balcony of the UN calling for a world parliament, a parliament of humans, not just the national leaders. And it's amazing, wonderful story. And so he was traveling with no documents, and he tells this story for many years. But he kept getting arrested or stopped at frontiers because he had no document. So necessity is the parent of invention, as they say. So he decided he needed some document that represented his situation. Being, you might say, stateless. I don't like calling Garry stateless. He was actually world full, not stateless, because he was full of love and an appreciation of this wonderful blue dot that we are all living on. So he decided he needed something, and that's when he created, as you showed, the World Passport. We actually also have another version that says World Government Passport. And then he was much more easily able to travel. The rest of his adult life, that was the only document that he had. So he loved to quote Einstein, who said, "Imagination is more important than intelligence." Gary had to imagine a world where he, as who had given up his citizenship for not just because he had anything against the United States in particular, he loved his cultural identity. In fact, he wanted to protect it. And he would always say, "David, we have to move beyond our national citizenship, or that yoke, or that framework that we're in. If we want to protect it, we have to move to a higher level of allegiance to humanity and the earth." So he had to imagine this higher level allegiance as world citizenship, and create the documents like the World Passport to help him to exercise his innate and unalienable human rights. So that's just a nutshell of the story. And I would actually encourage your followers and listeners to go to, this is not our website, but the website of a collegial organization, which is theworldismycountry.com. Theworldismycountry.com is a documentary, a wonderful documentary where Garry actually is telling his story, this story that I just gave a little synopsis of, and interspersed with amazing footage from the 1940s and up to when he died in 2013. It's an amazing, compelling story. In fact, I don't know if you know of the actor Martin Sheen.
Yes,
Martin Sheen, yeah. So he actually introduces the film and also does a little speech at the end of the film. And he was just on, there's a big news station here in the United States. I don't know if it's international, called MSNBC.
I know it because I know it from the States, but we don't have it here.
Yeah, it's like CNN, I guess. But so Martin Sheen was just on an evening show promoting The World Is My Country, which is the name of the documentary about Garry Davis. But anyone in the audience who wants to actually see the film, you can watch the film by downloading it from that website. And the exciting thing is that it's on, I don't know, about 120 public television stations now, running, every few weeks here in the United States, all over the country. And of course, the next step is to have it shown to people all over the world.
That's brilliant that it's really getting out there, because I guess it was made some time ago and it's only now really beginning to take off as people are really seeing their freedom curtailed.
Yeah. Yes. Pam, you're right. We've lived for the last year and a half secluded by ourselves, but we've all been living in a situation where we are all impacted. It's certainly the most vulnerable populations in the world have been, which they always are much more impacted by things like the pandemic. Us in the so-called developed or first world, we may be able to protect ourselves to some small degree from the ravages of the environment, or what humans have done to the environment, from wars and other things. But certainly the pandemic has dramatically impacted much more refugees and people who are already in an impoverished situation more than, say, us. But we all have lived through this a lot of us have lived through the pandemic and realized we have to start working together as one human family if we are going to ever prevent any future pandemic from having the sort of ravaging and devastating effects that this one did.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I agree. Yeah. And in working together as one human family is in my world, in my view, it is definitely not working together as one world family in the way that the World Economic Forum wants it, where there is a small elite group that basically decides everything for everyone else in the world and have all the power, but in a way or at a level where we are all world men and world women living on planet Earth and with the sovereign rights of each and every one of us. And this is where I find that what you have here with the passport and the other things in from the World Service Authority, from the organization, is really, really interesting. But how do you see it from from your end, do you also see that this as a tool to bring everyone into a sovereign status, or what are your thoughts?
Well, you highlighted in your comments, Oliver, the point that there really already is a world government functioning, but that government is not of, by, and for the people of the world. It's a small, maybe 1% of 1% of the world's population who are controlling everything else, all of our resources, all of our ability to exercise our fundamental rights or not. And that doesn't seem fair to me. It's not based upon law. It's based really upon power, and it's oftentimes based upon violent power and based upon historical colonization of the world by certain groups of people over others. The world has been built, sadly, or at least the developed world has been built upon violence and oppression. So when we show this world passport, it's not just for a tool for an individual to exercise their right to freedom of travel or exercise the right to identify themselves as an individual with universal rights. It's a tool to say we need to create a fully functioning global government system that we, the people, all are able to participate in a democratic way. So it's much more than just the tool to help the individual. It's really to build a system, and that is a human system or human environmental, because we humans tend to separate ourselves from the natural environment, and I think that's part of the reason we're living in times where the world temperature, the Earth's temperature is dramatically rising and causing sea levels to rise, causing people who might be in a certain part of the world who will no longer to be able to live in their part of the world because of the sea level rising. And where do they go? If they, I could see Italy at some point being completely covered by water, right? And where do people who consider themselves Italian go? Do they go to France? Do they go to Germany? I mean, as Europeans, they would be able to, right? But in parts of the world where there isn't a union already or a federation like there is there in Europe, will they be able to find a place where other humans will take them in and consider that they have rights that should be respected? So it's a question of building this world governmental system. And World Service Authority actually is the administrative branch of a world citizen government that Garry Davis founded in 1953, in World Service Authority in 1954, after having a mandate of almost 1 million people who had registered as world citizens, officially, you might say, through the registry that he had created in Paris in January 1st of 1949. And we continue at World Service Authority to, when I say register, I mean it's confirming the fact that we're already world citizens by birth and in fact, and we can go into that if you want a little bit later about what is citizenship and what makes world citizenship different than, say, national citizenship. But by having that mandate of all those people who said, yes, we see ourselves as world citizens, Garry took that and said, okay, why don't we not only officially sort of register people as world citizens, but legally and politically. So when you sign actually the pledge and affirmation of world citizenship, you're saying I am giving allegiance to humanity and the earth, not because I'm trying to give up anything else or any other level. Garry was not trying to at all rid us of the nation state system. I mean, that would be at this point probably impossible, but living the impossible means who knows what the future could be. So his whole point was that we need to rid ourselves of the anarchy that exists between the states. I mean, back in the late 80s, maybe 1989, François Mitterrand, President of France, and Chancellor Kohl, they got up on a podium together and they said, why do we want something more than just this European economic community? We want a European Union. And their answer was because we do not want to see another war in Western Europe ever again. And I mean, there really hasn't been. I mean, on the edges, I guess you could say, in the former Yugoslavia, there was a war, right? But not in main part of Western Europe. So we know that uniting in a federative or federation system can prevent war, because then, you can't kill someone on the streets of Paris and then flee to Berlin, because there's European laws that make that, consider that murder. But at the global level, you could be wearing a military uniform and you can get away with murder. And that seems reprehensible to me, that we have laws like international humanitarian laws that say, if war is quick and it's targeted only to combatants, and that you could have it if it's so-called for self-defense. So anyway, my whole point about this is that the tools that we provide, whether it's the World Passport, whether it's registering people as world citizens, is not just for identification or travel purposes. It's really, the ultimate goal is world peace and justice through world citizenship and world law.
Yeah, amazing. I was just thinking as well on the numbers. You talk about 1949-50, and he got 1 million people signing up.
Right.
I mean, back then, without the infrastructure that we've got now, I mean, it's literally was letter writing. It's very, very impressive.
Yeah, I mean, it was just amazing. You see this in the film "The World Is My Country." Gary's, on the steps of Palais de Chaillot, he all he has is his sleeping bag. But the French intellectuals like, Albert Camus and other people come to his aid. The French public bring him bottles of wine and fromage, cheese, and then they even give him a tent. But what happens is he starts getting these big, I don't know if you remember these big mail bags,
yeah.
That, have tons of mail in them, letters, and that the UN guards would bring to him as he's sitting on the steps by the UN commissary, which was part of the the UN where he was sleeping out, staying out during the day, and he would just be opening the letters, and finally, this is why when he went, although he was physically removed by the French police back into France, you might say, because it was international territory when the UN was there in Paris, but. He created that. Part of the reason of creating that registry was because there was such a groundswell of people after having suffered from the ravages of World War II, who said we need something different, something better. A world where war is outlawed, where we are working together rather than working apart.
That is absolutely. I totally and fully agree with that. I'm a little curious around the world government that was then installed. So, how does it work? Which you talked about world law. Have they? Who is you could say deciding who are there in the governing body, and what laws has been created, and
Sure.
all of that.
Right. Well, so I first have to say that the world citizen government is a government in microcosm. It's not yet obviously in macrocosm. So we are providing services like any government might provide, which includes our identification services, like providing the passport, our world ID card, our world political asylum card for refugees, our world marriage card for both straight as well as LGBTQ community, which we've been doing even way before marriage equality was even considered in most parts of the world. So our documents, even like our world birth certificate, has helped people. Like there was a child, and I won't name the place just to not cause any anger, but there was a place where a child was born and the parents were of different ethnicities than that country, and the child was refused medical services and couldn't go to school. We issued the child a world birth certificate and then apostilled it, meaning we put a certification on top. And because when there's a country that's a party to the Hague Convention on Apostilles, that other country has to accept at least the verification of the document. So the child was then, after having that document, showing it to the school and to the doctor, was able to get medical services from the doctor and go to school. So, I mean, it's amazing the power of these documents, but it's not just that. So Garry would always call himself world coordinator, not president of the world or something like that, because it was really more a coordination effort of figuring out who can we bring together the greatest minds to help us to actually create the institutions of law that we as one human family need to live together peacefully with each other and sustainably with the earth. So we are starting to build those ligaments of world law. And of course, you can talk about, and everybody gets this when you get your World Passport, Oliver, you got this, I'm sure. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or you might have gotten it. We may have sent it in Danish. I don't remember.
No, I think I actually got the English version. Yeah.
Okay, well, we could send it to you in Danish if you'd like. So that's sort of, you almost might call this right now a charter of rights, or almost like a world constitution, right? So that's one.
And I think it's the universe. I've read the documents of that, and I think it's so important right now. There's so many ways that certainly in the last year we've our rights as human citizens have our human rights have been severely curtailed and misused. There's several, the coercion of the vaccines, we've been paid for them and stuff like that, and it's all in there. I think everybody has the right to make their own mind up whether they take the vaccine or not, but they shouldn't be coerced into it with whatever, free chips or free college places or whatever that's going on right now. And I think things like the human rights there are very important.
Well, oh yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the aspects of the work that we do to create the fully functioning world citizen government out of the microcosmic one now is we have a legal advocacy team who is working to help individuals around the world who are either stuck in a place where they're being persecuted or have fled to a place where they may not find yet a safe haven. So, for example, there's groups of Ogoni refugees. I don't know if you've heard of the Ogoni. They were living in Nigeria, Ogoni land, but Shell oil came in and really sort of ravaged their land to digging for oil, and it made it uninhabitable. So some of them stayed in Nigeria. Some of them fled to neighboring countries like Benin. Some who were in Benin were living in a refugee camp, but it was like squalor. They felt that it was actually safer for them to live almost in the woods, creating their own tents and tent village, than to live in the refugee camp. And that's really sad to me, that these fundamental basic rights of food, clothing, shelter, education, at a minimum, I mean, it should be at a maximum. All of our rights should be respected, but so many people are suffering. And so recently, the World Service Authority's legal team sent 2 briefs to the African Commission on Human and People's Rights to help those Ogoni refugees, because they weren't getting help from the Benin government or the Nigerian government. So this is part of the problem with the nation-state system, that national governments can get away with violating our human rights with impunity. But so more than that, though, we are trying to develop other institutions. So, for example, I like showing props. I hope that doesn't bother you, but we have and I don't know if you can read that, but it's a statute for a World Court of Human Rights. But although I think we're going to increase it to a World Court of Human and Environmental Rights, or a World Court of Universal Rights, that we need as humans to be able to say, look, if some government or some corporation or something is violating our human rights, at best, we might be able to try to get some kind of national reconciliation or resolution. But if we can't, where do we go? I mean, you might be able to go to the commission that is part of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights to get them to try to do something to help you, but maybe not. So we're saying, the ICJ, which is not for individuals, it's only for national governments in the UN, the ICC, which is really only for war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, those are not enough for us as humans to make sure that our universal rights are respected. So in building this world citizen government, we are creating these institutions of law. And there's other people out there who are creating, for example, a United Nations Parliamentary Assembly as a first step to having a real governmental system. The UN is not a government. It's just sort of a club of nations. And one thing Garry would always say is, nations don't unite. People do. So that doesn't mean I'm saying that there's a problem with some of what the UN's done. Of course, there's some great things that the UN has done. Like the World Health Organization actually has some great suggestions of how to handle pandemics. But because the national governments can do what they want or reject it, there's no sort of overarching human system to deal with those things. But not only that, there's other people, and so it's not just us, but we are working with these people now. So there's also a constitution for the Federation of the Earth, believe it or not. So a world constitution. These are tools that humans, we can implement to start working together, that will build the fully functioning global governmental system that is not run by the 1%, but that's run by us. So, so in a sense, back to what you were asking, Oliver, who's in charge? I mean, yes, I'm the president of World Service Authority, but right now there is no fully functioning world parliament. So that there is nobody we're voting for. But we do have a website that is, we have sort of holding called worldelections.org. So we're hoping at some point that humans can vote. And certainly even now, if anyone has their mobile phone, even in a small village, as long as there's like a satellite link, everyone in a small village of, 75 or 100 people or something could actually vote in some kind of world election or world referendum if we have that in the future. So there are many other ways that we could actually start governing our world where we're not doing it. I mean, the world really needs a brain. It doesn't have one now. We're not working in a coordinated effort. I mean, what if your hand were over here doing something like this because you had some disease that caused, your arm to just keep doing this all day? That would be very frustrating, right? If your brain is not working exactly right to control your body. And for some people, that unfortunately, that's the case. But right now, the reason we're seeing the disparity of wealth and the world hunger and poverty and injustice in the world is because we're working in these 200 or so separate units that aren't working together because it's all about self-interest. What can we get for us alone and not for humanity? Not that we shouldn't be thinking, how can we help ourselves, but to do it much more effectively, we have to be helping everybody. I mean, all for one and one for all.
Yeah, all of these. Yeah, go ahead, Pam.
I was going to say, I think one of the major problems as well, isn't it, is that most governments are very, very short-term thinkers.
Yes.
That they're only working on, well, what do I need to do to get elected this time and next time in sort of 3, 4, 5 years, whatever the country's thing is. Then they're not thinking out to the 10, 15, 20, 50 years big picture, which is what is essential to really correct an awful lot of this stuff, because some of it you can't do in a year.
I agree.
Yeah, and most of the ones who are at the top of the governments, they are you could say allowed to be there through a process with these very, very few 1% of the 1%. So to make sure that they'll make decisions that are fitting in with those very, very few and very powerful people. Because it's very easy. I think anybody who would look at the decisions in their own country that their government has taken over the last period of time. I mean, I can recall 30 years ago looking at decisions from my government when I was 35, when I was like a young teenager, and I was going, why are they taking these decisions? These are not in the best interest of people. It was so clear to me. And it's been the same ever since. So it's very, very obvious from just looking systemically at it that the ones who are deciding, in my country at least, haven't got the interest of the people who actually put the votes in the voting polls. And so somebody is clearly deciding who can get on top of those lists that will be elected, because, otherwise it will look differently. So I think I totally agree with what you're saying there, that if we had a system which would be like decisions would be taken, and I know technically it's possible with blockchain technology and stuff, that everyone would have one vote, and then everyone could vote for whatever, solution or action was put out there, then that would be much more of a direct governing system. That would probably be, as I see it, a stepping stone for us to get rid of the what we call democracy, but which actually, to my best of knowledge, isn't.
I agree. Yeah. One of the next steps for us is to take the world passport and create a digital ID. Maybe, I don't know if it will be on exactly the blockchain. It has to be on a system that doesn't use more energy. Like, Bitcoin is using so much energy to produce itself in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, they're saying that, but actually, I've been hearing quite a lot recently. Yes, it does, but it's still only a tenth of what the Federal Reserve uses.
True. Well, plus, if you think about it, national governments spend together probably a little over $2 trillion to prepare for and wage war. I mean, the U.S. government is almost half of that. And why, just think about how it would only be about $400 billion to end world hunger, which is not even a fourth of the $2 trillion that governments are spending on killing, right, or preparing to kill. It doesn't make sense that we have our political priorities on death rather than life.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's a very simple solution. Remove all production of all weapons and remove them totally from the surface of planet Earth. And you would, nobody would talk about environmental issues.
Oh, yeah.
That's how much it uses. So that would be, and just that, everybody knows it's BS, it's bullshit. Nobody wants it. So,
right.
Yeah. Anyway, that was a little bit sidetracking there.
That's okay. That's the fun of these conversations.
But interesting and important. So let's say, because one of the now we've been around the big lines, and the future, how we see it, where we each of us, our thoughts about that, and I really find that fascinating. I'm looking forward to be part of the development here. When it comes down to the more, general applications, both how it has been and how it is right now with the documents, like as a travel document, because I know that there are many of our listeners who are looking into getting away from being a state citizen and being a sovereign being, moving out of the debt-based systems as well, if possible, and having and not using any of the documents that the states are supplying because it's their property. So if we move into actually using the world passport and as a travel document or identification document, how's it looking? Because so many other areas, things are tightening up at the moment. And is that what you're experiencing around the use of the world passport as well? There are many ways we unknowingly are treated as slaves in today's society. The deep state agenda, which is behind government, states and systems, want to remove all freedom as they thrive on our energy and powers. Footsteps for Freedom, How We Have Been Tricked to Slavery, is an extensive book in which we explore some of the traps and ways we are hijacked, deceived, spellcast and programmed to stay in the matrix. Get it for free on holyland.me/freedom book. That is WHOLYLAND.me/FREEDOMBOOK.
Yeah, the fact that because of the pandemic, I guess specifically, although maybe there's ulterior motives besides that by governments, even like the U.S. passport became almost worthless, and it used to be considered one like those passport lists, one of the top, maybe not, obviously not the top, but one of the top passports because U.S. citizens could go to maybe 134, 135 countries without a visa prior to travel. So it made it powerful. But, once all the walls, the borders were shut, that meant you couldn't even get into Canada, as a U.S. citizen, and vice versa. So, it's impacted certainly world passport holders, but there are world passport holders who use their world passport simply for identification, even on a day-to-day basis. It's not just for travel. So people have found it very useful, whether it's to, pick up a prescription at a pharmacy, or to be able to, once their gym is reopening, to go and do their yoga, or to pick up, to enter some kind of office building where you have to show identification. So people use that on a day-to-day basis, even, within their local community. It's not just simply meant for global travel. But Garry Davis would always say that the world passport is an anti-passport. The point is, why do we need a piece of paper to identify ourselves as human beings with these fundamental or universal rights to then be able to exercise them? I mean, when you get off an airplane and you're faced by the border immigration officials, they look at you and they say, okay, you're not a grizzly bear, you're not a shark or whatever, you're a human, so I will respect your rights. Now, maybe they'll take your picture or something like that in case you enter the community and do something horrible. Hopefully not, but later on they can catch up with you somehow. But just because you don't maybe have a home, a family, an automobile, a steady job, or a whole bunch of money in your bank account, does that mean that you shouldn't be able to go from one part of the world to find a job or educate yourself in another part of the world? That really shouldn't be the case. I mean, there's always been. I mean, any passport has really only been in existence since around after World War I, or definitely after World War II. I mean, passports were originally a way back a long time ago for a ruler to say, this is the person who's representing me to go and get some salt or some sugar from your part of the world and bring it back, right? Just so it was almost like, hello, here's who I am, please, this sovereign, this king or queen or whoever is asking for you to recognize me. But then it became a control device. But it's really only been around for, about 100 years or so, which, it's hard for us to imagine any system without it, right? But even prior to that, so for example, Garry Davis's parents, between World War I and World War II, they traveled all over Europe with no passport, completely. But even prior to that, you still had to be of a certain status to be able to travel, whether it's to purchase, literally like purchase a ticket, so to speak, to get on a ship to go somewhere else. Unless you could have the ingenuity or the resources to build your own raft or whatever else, maybe most people traveled 50, 100 miles max from where they were born their whole life, right? Until the modern age. So the world passport is really to step in there and say, we want to get to a situation where all those discriminatory factors that prevented, certain people, whether it's people of color or certain people of certain gender or whatever else, not being able to travel, all that should disappear. Anyone, just because you're living and can do so, should be able to go where you want to. Now, of course, that's not the system that we're living in, and that presupposes creating, in a sense, a world citizen, an ethical world citizen living system for all human beings, so that everyone has all their needs met. And so basically, right now, I can travel from Washington, D.C. to Virginia or to Maryland, and I don't need to show any document. I might have a state ID that says, okay, yes, I've been tested so I can drive safely, right? But I could go and pick up and tomorrow, move to New York or to Florida or to the United Kingdom. Well, maybe not the United Kingdom as easily, but I almost could, especially if I have a job prepared there. But that's only because there are, agreements or treaties, in a sense, between certain countries like the U.S. and the U.K. that make it relatively easy. But it wouldn't necessarily be easy for someone, say, from Zimbabwe to go to the U.K. or to come to the United States without proving all those things, that you have a home, a family, a car, a steady job, money in your bank account, in a sense that you're worthy of getting even a tourist visa to come. But so if we think of the world as one planetary community, then all those fictional borders that old white men mostly created, wouldn't matter. They wouldn't matter as it doesn't matter, like, from me to go from Illinois to Indiana, or from Missouri to Kansas. That it's just I'm staying on the highway. I'm just continuing on the train or in my car going. There's nothing stopping me there, and that's because there is law between, say, Missouri and Kansas, so that if they decide that they are going to start arguing over some resources, then they have to take it to a federal court, because there is law beyond them. but there isn't common world law beyond China, Russia, U.S., U.K., Denmark, Sweden, Spain, wherever. I mean, there is in the European Union, or there is here within the United States, and there is in certain parts of the world. I mean, right now, even in Africa, they're thinking of creating an African passport for all of Africa, so that you could go from Ghana to Kenya, or South Africa to Morocco with only one African passport. So all we're saying at World Service Authority, and with this idea of a world citizen government, is we just need to take our sovereignty, our allegiance, because you mentioned sovereignty, and raise it one level higher. I mean, that's how throughout history humans have stopped fighting, by coming together, whether it's one tribe, the children of each tribe getting married, and then, creating in a sense, a bigger tribe. What's the biggest tribe? Humanity. I mean, what's even bigger than that is the sort of our human relationship with the earth and all the other beings here. I mean, we think we're, the top of all creatures, but that's our hubris is what's put us in this difficult situation that we're living in the world, whether it's the climate crisis, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's war or whatever else. It's because we're not thinking that we can live the impossible, that we can live in a way that is sustainable and loving, rather than, I like to say, why fight and die for a country when you can love and live for humanity and the earth. And in a sense, we can say our country is really the world. It's no longer just the local place where we're born.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I mean, I personally have always felt more of a world global citizen than that. Yes, I've got a UK passport, but and I've got a European UK passport. Of course, we know that's potentially I might have to change that very soon.
Sure.
And it's something we've realised with Brexit, that that ability to travel with ease around Europe has just suddenly disappeared.
Right. Yeah. I mean, once you've lived a certain way, beyond your local identity, it's hard to go back to something smaller, in a sense. I mean, part of I think what would make the world work better is if we are living more sustainably locally, indigenously, eating only foods that are in our region, rather than, importing all this stuff that causes so much energy use and all, but also expanding beyond our national framework. We need to do both. It's sort of like the principle of subsidiarity. I think government governs best that governs most local, because then you are there. You could be on the city council. You can go to those meetings literally in person, whereas you can't easily, maybe get to the UN. Not that it would matter, because you don't have a voice there at this point. But then to have a global governmental system where we would be able to vote and decide how are we going to run our world together. I mean, once again, it is really hard to imagine, because we've been so brainwashed by this current system, this Westphalian system. I mean, what I like to ask is, what operating system are you using on your telephone now? Like, if you have an iPhone, it's probably like 14.2 or whatever it is. But you right now, like, to have this Zoom meeting on like an iPhone 2, you probably couldn't do it. So why are we as a human, human entities running our world on an operating system that's almost 400 years old? The Treaty of Westphalia and the nation state system. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with nation states. And when you, for example, register as a world citizen with World Service Authority, you do not, and I'll repeat, do not give up any other allegiance that you might have. All we're saying is, why don't we create an operating system for our planet? And I really would encourage you to watch. I don't know if you've ever seen this short video on YouTube called Pale Blue Dot. It's by Carl Sagan. Yeah. I mean, that really puts who we are and our identity into perspective when you can see the world. It's called the overview effect. When you can see the world from outer space as astronauts see it. There was a Saudi astronaut who, when he went up in space and was, going around the Earth a couple times, an hour, he said, well, the first day we were out there, we looked at, we tried to find our country. By, the third day, we saw our region. And by the fourth or fifth day, all we saw was one world. So, I mean, for humans, and what's really cool about virtual reality now is we can just have like a headset, and we could experience what anyone could experience what astronauts see, and that may make us think about who we are and the, almost like the minuscule nature of our existence in this universe or potential multiverse. We're this little blue speck, floating in space. We're our own desert island in a sense, that we have right now. We don't really have any other place to go. Mars is a long shot, and even if we could get a few people there, and unless we start working together, we're never going to be able to go beyond our planet Earth, which, I hear that like in, 4 billion years or something, the sun will, crash into the Earth or whatever, and we'll all, humanity will no longer exist after that, unless we've started working together to figure out how do we become interstellar, unless we put all of our minds together instead of in 200 separate, units that are always fighting. Why not all, the scientists of all these 200 countries be working together? And I think the scientists on their own would do that, and many do, if it weren't for the funding or the control by governments and corporations.
Yeah, it always comes back to the funding, doesn't it, really? It's follow
money.
The money.
So. Money talks, sadly. Money controls. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there is that practical application right now, as it is, when we do have nation states and we do want to go from one territory to another. We can always, in another episode, look into what kind of territories it is and why we have passports, because that's an interesting story. But when we do want to go from one place to another, and we do have the, as you've mentioned, and you've shown also the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, which says everybody has a right to travel. And we then travel with the as a world citizen with the world passport.
Mm-hmm.
At the minute, because after I was anxious to try mine out and see how it works, and we're very close to Sweden, and I had also some business to do in Sweden. So I thought this is going to be great. I get to try it out, and then I experienced that. Well, on the first trip, they got a little angry, also because I didn't have that test that they wanted the people to have, and I sort of reminded them about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and they took the passports, and they, in the end, they were not very pleasant, these border guards, and they ended up throwing them back on the boat, and due to, you haven't got that test, and we don't let foreigners in. And said, how about the passport then? And I said, oh no, we wouldn't recognize that either. But that was not a really clear answer. And then I got back to Denmark, showed the passport to the police officer, and he just smiled and said hi. Okay, welcome. So next trip, week after, I go over, and this time they've lifted the restrictions on all the other stuff. So I just, used the passport, and they actually said, the border police in Sweden, they said, no, well, we don't, they went in and checked up on it and came back and said, we don't recognize these travel documents. Have to show something else. And in order to come in and do my business, I used my Danish driver's license, the state driver's license, because I did need to pick up some stuff in Sweden. Instead of go on the 20-minute ferry back. And then I did that, and I came back to Denmark, and I showed the world passport, and the first time it wasn't really examined. This time the border police, he actually looked at it and he said, oh, this is interesting, and looked at it, and I haven't seen this one before. Let me see. And he took up his phone, and he spent a couple of minutes checking some stuff out. I said, yeah. I said, you haven't seen it before? He said, no, this is the first time. It was the same guy as the week before, but I didn't tell him. I didn't want to upset him. But anyway, he checked everything up on his phone, and then he said, yeah, that's okay. That's good. It's okay.
But he didn't stamp it, did he?
He didn't stamp it because stamping is not really used when you cross these borders. Most of the time, we haven't had actually even border controls between Denmark and Sweden. It's just, at the minute we have. So it's been a good opportunity with this COVID thing that they've actually reinstated the border patrols, because otherwise I couldn't have. I would just have traveled back and forth.
Right.
And I would have had, knock some doors to ask them to look at the passport.
Sure. Yeah, of course.
If there had been anybody at the border.
Right.
And this is how it is sometimes in Europe. A few years ago, we drove all around Europe, hardly showing any papers at all. So I've had, just that was two different experiences with the world passport. And then so that's interesting to speak into how to handle these situations. I know that you also said, maybe we spoke a few weeks ago, and you said maybe I could get an embassy to stamp the passport before going to the country, to be able to, so it would be easier for the border patrol to recognize it. So I've attempted that. Written nowadays, they say, due to this COVID thing, you have to write to the embassy and email what you want. So I've done that to I think 12, 13 embassies just 5 days ago, and received different replies on some of them. Slovenia was the most fun one. They said, we don't recognize any fantasy passports, including the one you mentioned here. Right. Then I've had some straight no's, like you can't use that travel document to come in here, from France and Spain and Norway. And then I've had the Czech Republic saying, well, of course, because I wrote that it's been used before and I want to use it. Well, can I get some stamp in it from you guys, so it'll be easier when I come with my family? And then the Czech Republic said, well, it's been used before and we totally recognize it and there's no issue. You just show it at the border patrol and it'll be fine. So, different, and then there's like a handful I haven't had a reply from yet during this week. So these different replies, this was a long story around the different replies. I just wanted to give an overview. Mm-hmm. How is it a good way to handle these situations if you want to use the world passports?
Yes. Well, I would guess, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, in every single maybe written reply that you received, and maybe even some of the verbal ones when you were going into Sweden, all the official said was, we do not recognize that document, or our government does not accept that document. But I would guess that none of them provided any law that actually specifically states that they don't. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. So that's because the majority of governments in the world, there may be one or two that have actually created a law against it, perhaps, although I would say that if they have, that law is unconstitutional because it would violate their obligations under international treaty law, actually. But in any case, for all the governments, which is the majority of the governments in the world, that unless there is a law against it, by law, they have to accept it, because whatever is not prohibited by law is allowed by law. So that's one way to answer an official when they say, we don't recognize it. You can say, well, is that just your personal opinion? Are you discriminating against me? Or, can you show me a specific law in writing? Now, they might say, well, I'm at the border, I'm the authority, I don't have to show you anything. You might ask them for their name or their badge number so that that you are challenging their authority. They might not like that. And, in this day and age, because of fear over terrorism, for example, you could potentially get handcuffed, I guess, if you push it very far. I mean, Garry Davis, when he traveled, throughout his entire adult life with only the world passport, he was able to do many of these things. But he would still sometimes, he was detained 2 times more than Martin Luther King. He was detained 34 times in his life, either for having no document before he created the world passport, or even after he created the world passport, he would not take no for an answer. And what he would do is he would wait till the dark of night and sneak in on a bicycle. And then they would find him like a few days later and like, how did you get in, Mr. Davis? We're throwing you back out, or we're putting you in jail or whatever. So you have to, he could be a renunciate, meaning he could because he didn't really have to be anywhere at a certain time. Maybe he was sometimes going to peace conferences and other things, but he could be late to speak, but he could be late or whatever. When, at an airport, when was trying to board a plane and, there's an immigration officer saying, oh, we're not going to let you board this plane. Do you have something else? He's like, no. And they're like, well, they're like, because they thought he might really have something else. They said, well, you're going to miss your flight. And he would say to them, well, if there's going to be 10 more flights over the next couple of days, I don't care. I'll wait here for you to just decide that you're going to respect my rights. And oftentimes, he would wait the people out so much that they'd be like, okay, just go. And they'd let him go. So part of the effective use of the World Passport is knowing your rights, knowing that you have the right according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Well, there's the innate right to identify ourselves as a world citizen with universal rights. But that right has been reaffirmed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 13 of the Declaration, which says everyone has the right to freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state. And that's 13.1 and 13.2. Everyone has the right to leave any country, including their own, and to return to their country. That's even though the Declaration is customary international law, it has also been reaffirmed in binding treaty law in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and almost every country in the world has signed and ratified that international covenant. So all governments should. Now, and in fact, the number now I think is 188 countries out of the 192 or 193 official countries that have recognized the World Passport by placing visa, entry, and exit stamps in people's World Passports since 1954. That means that a little over 95% of all countries have recognized it. But just because it has been recognized in the past doesn't mean it will be recognized in your circumstance. You notice that already personally. So now to get to how to better use it, we have a YouTube video, and so I don't want to take a whole bunch of time going through this, but it's called the 10 P's, that's the letter P, of passport usage, like being peaceful, polite, professional, persuasive, persistent, patient, having proof. So like you could go when you travel with a copy of the national government's constitution where it says that, where it talks about the right to freedom of travel, for example. Like Ecuador actually says everyone has the right to come and go out of Ecuador. So that would be something you could show to that government if they were refusing you. But also having that copy of the declaration as everybody gets when we send the World Passport to them, to be able to prove that you have these rights to demand. So it's a question of sort of challenging the official. But even better than that, because if you're just going to a border, going to an airport, you haven't done anything to prepare for your trip other than buy your airline ticket, it's quite possible that the transportation, it's called TSA, the Transportation Security Administration, or something similar to that elsewhere in the world, the Customs and Border Patrol could, or even the airline could reject you, or even upon arrival in the next country, if you don't have a visa stamped in it ahead of time. And a visa, what I mean by visa is it's usually a sticker that has maybe your picture on it and your names and other personal information that says that you can come to our country, for 3 months, sometime over the next 6 months, and employment is prohibited unless it's a business visa, right? And that gets stamped in your passport ahead of time by you going to the consulate. Usually it's either part of an embassy or it might be its own separate, building. And you can, during COVID, can you apply in person? Maybe not. You might have to write, as you were saying, Oliver, you might have to write to them, and you might even have to mail in your passport with a self-addressed return stamped envelope, so they'll mail your passport back, hopefully with the visa stamped in it. That's really not the best way to do it. The best way is to go in person so you can have the kind of conversation that we are having now, where the official might say, well, we don't recognize them. You say, well, where's the legal basis for that? And then if they say no, you might say, well, I need to speak to your supervisor. So you get to maybe the ambassador or the chief consular officer. They could still say no. And that's when we have a legal advocacy team of volunteer lawyers and law students who will draft legal letters to support your right to travel if it is rejected, or maybe even ahead of time. Now, we're limited in our ability to do that for, we couldn't do thousands of those letters a month. It would be a lot less than that. But we do try to do that certainly when people's rights are violated. But even with this letter that we might write on your behalf that fully explains in excruciating detail why a particular government should give you a visa, and why if they don't, they're violating not only international treaty law but their national constitution, they could still say no. They have the power to say no. And as I mentioned, I don't know, it was maybe a half hour ago, governments can violate our human rights with impunity. So it's up to us, like Garry Davis did, to say, this is who I am. This represents me. So let me now give you a quick story. I was going to Canada for a peace conference a couple of years ago. I guess it was in 2019. And I had my U.S. passport, I had my world passport, and I showed them both at the same time, actually. And that can be useful to show, both together, or even maybe show your national passport if you have one first, and then say, oh, can you stamp this? So I was saying, oh, can you also stamp my peace passport? Because I was going to a peace conference. I called it my peace passport. It can be called that. It's a world passport. It's a world citizen passport. It's a human rights passport. It's all of those things, right? It's a UN mandated, you might even say, even though the UN doesn't have any power to accept or reject any passport, because it's only the nation states within that can do that. But it's mandated by the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Anyway, and I had the same experience. The immigration officer, she's like, oh, I've never seen this before. So she looked through it. Then she got on her computer and she's like, well, is World Service Authority a nonprofit organization in Washington, D.C.? And I said, I probably shouldn't have said this, but I said yes, which it is. I probably should have said, well, this is a world citizen government document. It's a governmental document. You're obliged to respect. I didn't say that at that point. But she's like, well, if I stamp this, I could get in trouble. It was almost like she was appealing to my empathy, because she didn't want to lose her job, basically, because she was new already. She wanted to do the right thing or whatever. So she's like, well, if I recognize this, that would be like the government of Canada recognizing this nonprofit, and I don't have the authority to do that. So I'm sorry, I can't. I don't really want to stamp it. Is it okay? And I'm like, shh. Fine, because for me, if I'd been Garry Davis, I would have been like, no, you must, I would have gotten arrested maybe, right? But I had to get to this peace conference because they were counting on me to do a whole presentation, a couple hour presentation. So I couldn't be the kind of renunciate that Garry could be. But what I found out a few months later was that I have a colleague in another organization that I work for called Citizens for Global Solutions. Their website's globalsolutions.org, which is also working towards creating a world federal democratic participatory governmental system. He was a religions professor, and he taught about the world's religions. He was going to a religions conference, and this was going to the Pearson Airport in Toronto, in Canada. And literally 2 weeks later, he went to the exact same border point, and he got an entry stamp into Canada with his world passport. So why did I, the president of the organization, who's used this passport, maybe not certainly as much as Garry Davis, because I don't travel that much, but why did he get it and I didn't? It's totally arbitrary. What that says to me is that border officials don't maybe know about this enough, although we do send a sample passport to every single government in the world periodically so that they are aware of it. But it could be, just how he looked different than I looked, or so another quick story. There was a fellow trying to go from, I think it was Las Vegas to Atlanta, because he lived in Atlanta, but he was visiting Las Vegas. He called me and said, David, I'm at the airport. I'm here with this TSA immigration official, and he's not letting me board the plane. And he's actually tried to hand his mobile phone to the officer, and the officer's like, no, I can't take your phone, and talk to. So I was explaining to him, but I was like, don't worry about that official. I said, I gave him some suggestions, and he's like, okay, David, give me about 20 minutes, a half hour. I'll call you back. So we went through what he should do. So what he did was, he didn't have to do this, but he did it anyway. He went to the bathroom. He changed his shirt. He waited about 15 or 20 minutes. He went to a different entry point at the airport, which would still get him to his gate, right? But not the one where he was with the other fellow. He came across a different border official, immigration official, showed his passport, and they're like, sure, let him on through. And he's like, I'm at my gate, David, I'm getting on the plane. And it was just totally arbitrary how, one official said, oh, we're not recognizing that anymore or something. Whereas the other official like, sure, that says to me that it's really becomes almost like the opinion of the particular border official. And that's, our rights are not based upon someone's opinion. They are written in law and they must be abided by.
Yeah, I think you've experienced that even just coming through on regular passports and stuff. Sometimes you sail through, and then another day you get the Spanish Inquisition. It's just. I'd like to come back to visas. So, we still have to go through the same visa process as what we do with the regular passport. So, for example, if I'm coming to the United States, I would still have to get an ESTA.
Yes,
for example.
this doesn't. Let me put it this way. Using a world passport should mean that you shouldn't have to do any of that. You should be able to just show your passport upon arrival and go as you please. That's really how it should be. They might stamp it, like I said, as you come in. But we know that that's not the way the system works. And so people ask, does the world passport work? And Garry would always say, no, it doesn't do anything. You have to work it. It just sits here on the desk. It doesn't, it's an inanimate object. You have to work it, meaning you have to know your rights. You have to know how to claim them. You have to be persistent. You have to have like if you're a Star Wars fan, the Obi-Wan Kenobi, Jedi mentality where you can say, those aren't the droids you're looking for. Meaning, this is a legitimate document. This is valid and you must recognize it. So you have to know that you have rights and not be afraid that when someone calls it something like fantasy. I mean, I like to say that the fantasy document is every single document of every single nation state. That is the real fantasy, because that does not represent the earth.
Exactly.
In fact, it represents division, violence, and war. In fact, almost, maybe not all, but almost every nation state was built upon, once again, usually either killing of people in that or enslaving people in that local area, right? Or at least, war and fighting for that. So there's no ethical principle behind most nation states in the world, whereas we need an ethical principle behind who we are as humans and how we interact. So once again, you should get a visa. To get back to your point, Pam, you should get a visa prior to travel. If you can, go to the consulate. Now, or like I said, another option is to take both passports, show them both, and if they'll stamp your world passport upon arrival, like that's why I asked you, Oliver, if they stamped, if you can get them to stamp it as you come back into Denmark, even though, you might even say, oh, can you just stamp this? I want a memory of my trip today or something. Put it that way. So it seems innocuous or whatever. But once you have that stamp in there, then when you show it to some other official later on, they might flip through it and they say, oh, that must be valid because somebody has already recognized it. I mean, Garry liked to play with the wording of the passport. This is a sample of a Garry Davis passport, right? And at the top here, it talks about how it's an important notice. And Garry would sometimes ask the official to read that, and the official would read it, and it says all these things, and it ends by saying, this document is not valid unless it is signed. And Garry said, well, did I sign it on the line? And they'd be like, well, yeah, I see your signature. And he's like, well, it says this is not valid unless it's signed. I signed it, so it must be valid. So he would play with their, draconian control methods by challenging them. I mean, Garry, for a part of his life, Garry was actually a Culligan water purifier salesperson when he was living in France, actually. And as a salesperson, so to speak, he knew that when the customer, in a sense, says no, that's what starts the conversation, right? No doesn't mean I'm walking away. No means, here, let me give you some more information, right? So when, in a sense, the customer here is the immigration officer that you're trying to sell the fact that you have rights, you're trying to sell that to them, in a sense, to respect those rights.
Wonderful.
It's not always easy, though. You become sorry to interrupt, you become a human rights activist, a human rights educator. You have to demand, but in a peaceful and polite way, that your rights be respected. It's not always easy. This is not for everybody. And, so sometimes I'm on the phone with people and I'm like, no, if you're just planning on going, say, to the United Kingdom, it's very hard to get in. I mean, I went to the UK when I first started working at World Service Authority back in the early 1990s. I went to the UK embassy with only my world passport. And I came up to this young fellow who's probably my age. I mean, I was, 23, 24, whatever. And he's like, oh, I haven't seen this. This is interesting. And at that point, we had a book called the Visa Book, which had a whole bunch of copies of stamps, that you could hand. So I handed that through the little glass window, and he looked at it. And he's like, well, I'd like to recognize this. And I'd already filled out my visa application. He's like, but I need to ask my supervisor. Can you hold on a second? So then he walks across the room, and I could see it because you could see through the glass, to the supervisor who was standing in the back. The supervisor looks through this. The guy didn't even bother to come over to talk to me. He yells across the room, and I could hear him through the glass, the bulletproof glass. I could hear him yelling, you sound like an American. Just go get your U.S. passport. So I'm like, how do I argue with that? And I'm like, well, no, but this is this is based upon my human rights. I was having to sort of yell through the window for him to hear. And he's like, so he whispered to the guy, and the guy came back to the window. He's like, look, David, I don't want to lose my job. I'm sorry, we're having to close the embassy now. And then shut the window. And his was the only window open. So I could have stayed in the embassy and maybe gotten arrested, for staying there. But, it would have been worthless because there was nothing I could do. So it can be hard. It's the wealthiest countries, UK, France, Germany.
It's hard enough to get back into the UK as a UK citizen.
Right. It's difficult. It's difficult, even for us first worlders. It can be difficult. So you need to know that ahead of time and be prepared potentially for a rejection. So this is why I say it's best if you have multiple tools in your travel toolbox, so that, if you have your backup, Danish or Ghanaian or whatever passport, why not? I mean, unless you are, one of the things you did that maybe we want to get into in the last few minutes that we have here, Oliver, was talking about sovereignty, and do people still want to recognize themselves, as Ghanaian or French or Chinese or whatever? But for people who don't mind, giving their allegiance to that as well as maybe beyond, then by all means, whatever you can, show to have it useful. And I did want to tell you a quick story about how it was in Norway, it wasn't in Denmark, about how there was a family of Afghani and Iraqi refugees who, during the height of the war, in Iraq, had fled to Norway. Well, so we issued the whole family, and we do issue a certain number of passports gratis or free every year to refugees and stateless people, because they have no support system. So we do that as a nonprofit to help. So anyway, they tried to use the World Passport to get some work and other things, but were having problems. But then they were able to use their World Passports to go to a bank in Norway, and I don't know the name of the bank, but they went to a bank, and the bank issued them a Norwegian bank photo ID, which had their photo on it. And what was amazing to me is the World Passport then became a springboard for them to exercise their rights, and they were able to take that bank ID that had their photo, kind of like you said you used your Danish ID to get back in or whatever, to go or to get into Sweden. They used that bank ID, and that allowed them to go to other countries, from Norway, whether it was Denmark, Sweden, or wherever, to get work where they weren't able to find work in Norway. And so it was very successful for them in that way. So the World Passport, once again, it's not a panacea. It's not a salve or a solve all for all situations. So sometimes I tell people on the phone, no, don't get it. And usually, I don't know, maybe it's a psychological trick, but that's people are like, oh, now I really want it. And I'm telling them, don't get it. But I really mean it. I mean, if someone's trying to get to a place where I know it can be very hard to get it, I'm like, this may not work for you. Please don't get it unless you think you want to just get it to support this philosophy of humanity, of human and earth coexistence in peace, which means world citizenship. If you want to, then by all means. But if you think you're going to use it to pack up and immediately get a job, in Canada or US or something, that's highly unlikely. Even though that should be the case. I mean, the ultimate goal is that we have this one world where all of our universal rights are respected. So it doesn't matter where you're born on planet Earth or how much money you have in your pocket. You should be able to do what you want, as long as you're not harming anybody, as a human.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I think if you bring in value as well to people's countries and everything, people are quite happy to stay at home. That They're only becoming refugees because of the situation. So if you improve the situation and get rid of the wars and the poverty and that, then you can travel because you choose to travel rather than having to. Yeah, occasionally, you want to go to another country for some work because it's seasonal work and you're a fruit picker or whatever. But you can do that and then you can go on home and
Yes, I agree with you totally, Pamela. You've said it like I always say it. Garry Davis envisioned a world we continue to build upon his legacy, to build a world where wherever you are, wherever you live, no matter where it is, you should have the ability to get an education, to better yourself, to, if you've ever studied, Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like to be able to get to that pinnacle of self-actualization. All of humanity, each of us individually should be able to reach that highest level. There shouldn't be 2 billion people, basically living under the poverty line, starving to death in a world, where there are plenty of resources if we choose to use them sustainably and wisely. And you're right. Then somebody from a poor place, which wouldn't be maybe poor anymore. Every place would be, pretty much better. Maybe you come to Florida to go to Disney World, right? But because you have a great, a great home where your friends, your family, your languages, you'll go home. You're right, Pam, exactly. Why are people forced? And it's going to be worse and worse as the climate situation deteriorates. There's going to be so many more refugees. I mean, right now we have, about 80 or 90 million refugees who are internally and externally displaced, as well as people who are made stateless, and that's more than 1% of the Earth's population of humans. Right? This doesn't make sense that in the 21st century we're allowing this kind of human treatment of other humans. It doesn't make sense.
Doesn't make sense, and that is where and this I really enjoyed in what you say with the use of whatever documents we use, that it is not just to have a quick fix and then use it. It is around the education, and I definitely find that using it, even with the rejection, it was a learning experience. I got to try standing for what's in the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, and talk to the border police about that, and then and pushing it as far as I felt I experienced possible. And next time I'll for sure look into some of the resources you've mentioned now, so that I'll have more to say, and I'll have stuff to write emails to these consulates or embassies that I'm in connection with this week, and see how that can move things, because I for sure I agree with you. It is around holding our position, and then knowing that if they want to do whatever and violate whatever treaty they have signed, they can do it.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. I mean, what Garry would consistently do, and this is some of what our legal department does, is when a government violates someone's human rights, we usually report it to the top official, the head of state, the prime minister, the president, the queen or king or whoever, and then of course send it to the lower level officials, as well as to the officials who've actually violated rights. So another quick story, there was a fellow who was coming from, I think it was Romania, into Italy. This was the early 1990s, before the European Union was fully, formed. And he was able to get into to Italy with his world passport. So he was able to make it there to begin with, but then he wanted to get a job. He was a violinist, I think, in an orchestra, and he brought his family with him. But the orchestra leader, or whoever was in charge, said, you have to go to the questura, which is like the police station in Italy, and get a work permit in your world passport. You came in, that's fine, but now you have to have the work permit, because that's a little bit more stringent, right? So he went to the police station, and the chief of police grabbed his passport and said, oh, no, we don't recognize this, just like you might have experienced, sort of in a gruff way, and took it. And so at that point, I think he was faxing us, because that was only the beginning of email in 1992, 93, whatever. He faxed us and called, I think. And so what we did was immediately write a letter to the Prime Minister of Italy, to the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Immigration, and to the Chief of Police. And I think we even CC'd it to, I don't know, was it Boutros Ghali, whoever was the Secretary General of the UN at that point, right? And so what that does is it means that the top official really sort of has to make the decision, and that lower level official, that chief of police, like, oh my God, I've just been reported on to the head of state of my country. What did I do wrong? And so what happened was, about a week later, he called us back. He's like, David, thank you so much for your legal department having done that. I was called in they called me, at my apartment to come into the police station. I was a little bit nervous they were going to deport me or something. But what happened is, when I got there, the chief of police handed me back my passport, apologized, and he gave me the work permit in my passport. So it is, speaking, as they say, speaking truth to power. In a sense, if you go to the top person, perhaps you can, although that may be less effective nowadays, because everybody has power now through Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and social media to try to get their word out. So the effectiveness of those kinds of legal campaigns are a little bit less than they used to be, because now, it's almost impossible, even, and we've tried to do this lately for some government officials, to find an email even for a government office anymore. They don't want to be bothered. Maybe there'll be a toll-free number that you can call, or there'll be an address that you can write to, but they really don't want to be bothered by the public. So they're secluding themselves even further back, in their secret rooms, to not be able to be accountable to the public.
Oh, totally. Yes. Yeah. I was trying to get out of a data protection thing with the NHS today, and it seems they've changed all the NHS numbers, because mine doesn't work. That's ridiculous. Government is supposed to be a service. Government is supposed to be a service to people. Is it okay? So the number, it's the wrong number. which I know it's the right number. I've got my NHS card,
Right.
But and then it turns around and says, "Well, we don't recognise your postcode." And I go, "Well, I know you do because I actually received a letter from you last week." But there's nobody you can get in touch with to sort of go. Right. So yeah, I'm still working on that one.
that's not how I envision government to be functioning. No,
absolutely not. It is, as you say, it is supposed to be service. It is. They are service providers to the people. That's what these government officials and everybody who works in that system what they are. So and that the educational aspect from our side is that you have mentioned is what is needed. So David, I want to thank you so much for spending time with us today, sharing all this information and also the remedies that are around the situation if somebody is saying, I don't know what that passport is. And I would like to ask you first of all, if you have any last things you'd like to share, and also then share how you would like for our audience to get in touch with your organization.
Sure. Yeah. Well, Pam and Oliver, thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity to share what I would say is the ideology or philosophy of world citizenship with your audience. And we always love when people around the world reach out to us. I mean, I love, when I go into the office every day, I don't exactly know what's going to happen, though, which makes my life as a universal rights lawyer, in a sense, kind of exciting. It's not your typical going to court or writing briefs always. It's I never know who's going to give me a call and say, I need your help today. So it's a very fulfilling life that I've had working with World Service Authority and trying to establish the ligaments of a global governmental, fully functioning governmental system. It's unique. It's unusual. It is living the impossible on a day-to-day basis. And I can't be more thankful for you for allowing us to share this idea, but also for the gratefulness that I have even to Garry Davis for having created this World Service Authority and this World Citizen Government, giving me as well as other the opportunity to start to self-identify as human beings or world citizens or sovereign beings first and foremost, and claiming our rights. Because unless you know your rights, if you don't know your rights, you can't claim them. And this is why, for whenever we send out information by mail, whether it's to someone who's receiving documents from us or who wants information, we always send a copy of the Declaration of Human Rights. It's so important to know your rights. And I guess I would end by, before I give you maybe our website address and all, I would end by saying, Garry Davis would always say, there are two most important questions of this 21st century. The first one is, who are you? And if you can't say I'm a world citizen, first and foremost, then the future of humanity is bleak. And the second question is, how do we ensure survival of humanity and the earth? If we can't answer that question, then our future is bleak. So we need to be able to answer, who we are and how do we ensure survival, not only us, but our parent earth. We have to do that, and we have to do it in a systemic way. We can't do it piecemeal, separated in our own little enclaves like we've done for so many the last 400 or so years. We need to come together. We need to recognize our unity. Yes, we have a lot of differences. That's going to make it hard, but it is not impossible. We can do this if we want. Yesterday's utopia is today's reality. If you told someone in 1900 that in 69 years humans would be able to land another human on the moon, they would have laughed at you. They would say that's ridiculous. That's never going to happen. But if we can do that, in the cosmic clock, in the cosmic time frame, 69 years is a millisecond. It's nothing. So
well, even in our own lifetime, even sort of 20, 30 years ago, that three of us from different continents would be having a conversation like we are now. It would, even though the internet existed back then, it would still be Really?
Yeah, no, I don't know. There was a cartoon when I was a kid called The Jetsons, and they had these TV screens, which are like Zoom, right? Which are like online meetings. And I was just like, oh, that would be so cool if that could happen. And that was like 1970 or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, it's amazing what we can do, but only if we choose to do it together. That's really what I think I would like to end on, is world citizenship is about our rights and duties to each other and to the earth, but brought to the world level, and to engage that idea and make it real. Making ideals real. So once again, I want to thank you. And I would say if anyone wants to reach out to us, our website is for now, it's going to probably change pretty soon because we're going to have a new website by the end of the summer, but worldservice.org, worldservice.org. And our main email is info@worldservice.org. And from there, you can find links to our YouTube channel, to our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram feeds, which we do keep updated. Weekly we put on new things. So please take a look and share with your friends, relatives, colleagues, and with anyone you think who might actually be in need. Because separately from issuing the documents, like I said, we do provide advocacy to people even who don't have WSA documents, who in a refugee type situation. We could perhaps write an amicus brief to assist somebody. So definitely reach out, and hopefully on your website you can also put the links to our website, and certainly to watch the YouTube videos that talk about how to claim your human rights, how to deal with bureaucracies who stand in your way. And once again, I would encourage you to take a look. You can find this. You have it on our website. Yeah. Yeah, or you can get it on Amazon, of course. But to really read about Garry Davis and his legacy. We're coming up to World Citizen Day. World Citizen Day is July 27th, which is Garry's birthday. He would have turned 100 this year if he were still. He died 7 years ago, but he would have turned 100 this year. So we're going to have a celebration to support that. Support maybe having a global World Citizen Day that everybody sort of celebrates Garry's legacy, but that we take that legacy and really push it forward for the future.
Yeah, fabulous. And if you let us know the new website when it comes up, we can update the show notes, because people might be watching this into the future. So
it'll forward actually to our new website. We'll probably keep the forwarding on forever. So yeah.
And we will update the show notes, and all the links will be in the show notes. That's how of course it is. So it's easy for listeners to just click the links in the show notes, and they'll be right with you. Thank you so much, David. It has been such a pleasure and to meet you and to get to know much more around how to use your documents and what you stand for, also on the bigger vision, which is totally amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, David. Great to meet you.
Great to meet you both.
Info. Cheers.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you for listening. Please find links and information about this episode in the show notes. And come to Holy Land to find all our podcast episodes. Holy Land is where leaders in wholeness and sovereignty meet. Holy Land, where we actively co-create whole and holy nations founded on compassion and freedom. And Holy Land is not for followers nor sheep. Join us on holyland.me. We accompany you there with Believe in You from our household musician John Century. See you in Holy Land. Dare to be different and unleash your genius at our Holy Land membership site, WHOLYLAND.me.